The shadows of the wilderness are filled with secrets, creatures that science can't explain, and legends dare not name. Tonight we venture into the unknown, where glowing eyes pierce the darkness and monstrous shapes stalk their prey. These are the terrifying cryptid encounters that will make you question what's truly lurking in the shadows. Welcome to Dark Tales Daily, if you dare. The Beast of Black Hollow. Black Hollow was the kind of town where nothing ever really happened. Tucked between rolling hills and dense forests, it was the sort of place where everyone knew everyone. So, when the first mutilated sheep was discovered, the whispers started almost immediately. At first, the townsfolk blamed coyotes. The sheep had been savaged, its carcass left near the edge of the woods. But the cuts were too clean, too precise for a wild animal. Farmers started patrolling their fields at night, rifles in hand, but the attacks didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. By the end of the week, 6 more sheep were found, each torn apart in ways that sent shivers down the spines of even the most seasoned ranchers. Jacob Fletcher was one of them, a widowed farmer who had lived in Black Hollow his entire life. He'd seen coyotes before, even wolves on occasion, but this was different. Whatever was killing the sheep wasn't just hunting, it was slaughtering. He knew he had to do something. His livelihood depended on it. One night, after finding 2 of his own lambs butchered, Jacob decided he'd had enough. He grabbed his shotgun, a flashlight, and his old hunting knife, then set off toward the woods. The full moon cast a pale glow over the landscape, but the trees quickly swallowed the light, plunging him into near darkness. The forest was eerily silent. No rustling leaves, no chirping crickets, just the sound of his boots crunching on the undergrowth. Jacob's flashlight beam danced over the trees, casting long, twisting shadows that seemed to move on their own. He felt a knot of unease tighten in his chest, but pushed forward. Whatever was out here, he was going to find it. As he moved deeper into the woods, he began to notice strange markings on the trees. Deep scratches, as if something massive had raked its claws against the bark. He knelt down to inspect one and found a tuft of fur caught in the splinters. It was black and coarse, unlike anything he'd seen before. That's when he heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to rumble through the ground itself. Jacob froze, gripping his shotgun tightly. The growl came again, this time closer. Slowly, he turned his flashlight in the direction of the sound. The beam landed on a pair of glowing yellow eyes, staring back at him from the darkness. The creature stepped forward, and Jacob's breath caught in his throat. It was enormous, easily the size of a bear, but its body was lean and sinewy, like a predator built for speed. Its fur was jet black, and its claws gleamed in the moonlight. But the most terrifying part was its face, a twisted, almost human-like snarl that seemed to mock him. Jacob raised his shotgun and fired. The blast echoed through the forest, but when the smoke cleared, the creature was gone. His flashlight scanned the area frantically, but there was no sign of it. No blood, no tracks, nothing. The growl came again, this time from behind him. He spun around, heart pounding, but before he could fire, the creature lunged. Jacob barely managed to dodge as it swiped at him, its claws tearing through his coat like paper. He stumbled back, firing another shot, but the beast was too fast. It circled him, its glowing eyes never leaving his. Desperate, Jacob swung his flashlight like a club, landing a lucky blow on the creature's head. It recoiled, letting out an ear-piercing shriek that made his ears ring. Seizing the opportunity, he turned and ran, adrenaline propelling him through the forest. The trees blurred past him as he sprinted toward the edge of the woods. He could hear the creature behind him, its heavy breaths and pounding footsteps growing closer. Just as he thought it was about to pounce, he burst into the open field, the lights of his farmhouse in the distance. To his relief, The creature stopped at the tree line, its glowing eyes watching him intently. For a moment, Jacob thought he saw something in those eyes, something almost intelligent. Then it turned and disappeared into the shadows. Jacob didn't sleep that night. He sat on his porch, shotgun in hand, waiting for the creature to return. But it never did. The attacks on the livestock stopped after that, and the town slowly returned to normal. People whispered about what Jacob might have seen, but he never told them the full story. Not the part about the eyes or how he sometimes felt like he was still being watched. The woods around Black Hollow remain quiet to this day, but the scars on the trees are still there, a silent reminder of the beast that once prowled their shadows. And on moonlit nights, if you stand at the edge of the forest and listen carefully, you might just hear a low, guttural growl, proof that some creatures never truly leave. The lights in the lake. Aaron had been fishing on Pine Haven Lake for as long as he could remember. Nestled deep in the woods, the lake was a quiet, serene spot that seemed untouched by time. For Aaron, it was his escape from the noise of the world, a place where he could cast his line and lose himself in the gentle rhythm of the water. But in recent weeks, the lake had taken on a different mood. It started with the lights. At first, Aaron thought they were just reflections, moonlight glinting off the surface, or maybe some kids fooling around with flashlights on the opposite shore. But these lights didn't behave like reflections. They moved with purpose, gliding beneath the water like glowing, restless spirits. The locals had their theories. Some said it was gas pockets escaping from the lake bed. Others claimed it was just fish disturbed by changes in the weather. But there were whispers of something darker, old stories about Pine Haven Lake being cursed, a place where things long forgotten still stirred in the depths. Aaron didn't believe in curses. He prided himself on being a man of reason. But the lights fascinated him, and the more he watched them, the more he felt an irresistible pull to uncover their source. One cool autumn evening, Aaron decided to investigate. The air was crisp, and a faint mist hovered over the lake as he paddled out in his old rowboat. The water was eerily still, the usual sounds of frogs and crickets strangely absent. He rowed to the center of the lake, where the lights had been appearing most often, and dropped anchor. The moon was full, casting a pale glow over the water. Aaron leaned over the side of the boat, his flashlight slicing through the inky depths. At first, he saw nothing but his own reflection. Then, just as he was about to give up, a faint glow appeared beneath the surface. The light was soft at first, barely more than a shimmer, but it grew brighter, closer. Aaron's breath caught in his throat as he realized there were multiple lights, moving in unison, almost like they were alive. They swirled and pulsed, their movements hypnotic. Curiosity overtook caution, and Aaron grabbed a fishing net, leaning dangerously over the edge of the boat. He lowered the net into the water, trying to scoop up whatever was creating the glow. The lights darted away as if taunting him, but one remained just within reach. With a quick flick of his wrist, he pulled the net back, hauling something onto the boat. At first, he thought it was a fish. It was small, no bigger than a football, and covered in shimmering, translucent scales that seemed to glow from within. But as he looked closer, he realized it had no eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, alien surface that pulsed with an unnatural rhythm. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't like anything he'd ever seen. Aaron stared in disbelief as the thing began to squirm, its light intensifying. Suddenly, the glow became blinding, forcing him to shield his eyes. When the light dimmed, he looked back at the creature, only to find it had dissolved into the air, leaving behind a faint mist and a strange, metallic smell. Before Aaron could process what had happened, the water beneath his boat began to churn. The gentle ripples of the lake were replaced by violent waves, as if something massive was rising from the depths. Aaron's flashlight fell into the water, leaving him in near total darkness. But he didn't need light to feel the presence beneath him. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating through the boat and into his chest. The lights returned, but this time there were dozens of them, swirling beneath the surface like a living constellation. The water roiled, and Aaron's boat rocked dangerously, threatening to capsize. Then he saw it, a shadow moving beneath the lights. It was enormous, its shape indistinct but undeniably alive. Aaron's mind raced, torn between awe and terror. Whatever this was, it wasn't natural. It wasn't supposed to exist. The shadow rose higher, and for a brief moment, the surface of the lake broke. Aaron caught a glimpse of something massive and sleek, its skin glistening with the same eerie glow as the lights. It moved with a fluid grace, almost as if it were studying him. Panic finally overtook him, and Aaron grabbed the oars, rowing frantically toward the shore. The lights followed, surrounding the boat in a swirling vortex. The hum grew louder, almost deafening, and the water seemed to pull at him, dragging the boat back toward the center of the lake. Just when he thought it was over, the lights suddenly stopped. The hum faded, and the water became still once more. Aaron's boat drifted in silence, the only sound his ragged breathing. He didn't wait to question his luck. He rowed to shore as fast as his arms would allow, abandoning the boat the moment it touched land. That was the last time Aaron ever set foot on Pine Haven Lake. He tried to warn others, but most dismissed his story as the ramblings of a man who'd spent too many nights alone in the woods. Still, the lights continued to appear, more frequently now, and with them came strange disappearances. Fishermen who never returned, campers whose tents were found empty by the water's edge. To this day, the lake remains shrouded in mystery. Some say it's cursed, a gateway to something ancient and unknowable. But if you ask Aaron, he'll tell you the truth. The lights aren't just reflections, and the thing in the lake isn't something you want to meet. The Man with No Shadow. It was a late autumn evening when Emily first saw him. She had just finished her shift at the small diner on Main Street and was walking home, the crisp night air nipping at her cheeks. The sidewalks were quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves blown by the wind. That's when she noticed him. He stood on the opposite side of the street under the flickering glow of a lamppost. He was tall and well-dressed, wearing a dark suit that seemed almost too formal for this sleepy little town. At first, Emily thought he was just a passerby, someone waiting for a ride or a bus. But something about him felt off. It wasn't until she glanced down that she realized why. The light from the lamppost cast long shadows across the pavement. Her shadow, the trees' shadows, even the shadow of the lamppost itself. But the man, he had none. Emily's pace quickened, her heart thudding in her chest. She kept her eyes forward, resisting the urge to look back. It was probably just a trick of the light, she told herself, something easily explained. But when she glanced over her shoulder, he was still there, standing perfectly still, his head tilted slightly as if watching her. She hurried the rest of the way home, locking the door behind her. The feeling of unease clung to her, and for the rest of the night she couldn't shake the image of the man with no shadow. The next day, Emily chalked it up to exhaustion. She had been working long hours at the diner, after all. By the time her shift ended, she had almost convinced herself it was nothing. But as she walked home that night, she saw him again. This time he was closer, standing at the corner of her street. The lamplight fell directly on him, yet once again the ground beneath him was bare. No shadow, no outline, just empty space. Emily's stomach twisted. She crossed to the other side of the street, her pace quick and determined, but she couldn't help glancing back. The man had turned. He was watching her. Emily barely slept that night. Every creak of her old apartment seemed amplified, every shadow on the wall a threat. By morning, she was determined to tell someone, anyone, about what she had seen. But who would believe her? "There's a man with no shadow" sounded like the ramblings of a madwoman. Instead, she confided in her co-worker, Kate, during the lull of the diner's mid-afternoon shift. Kate listened, her expression skeptical but kind. "Maybe it's just some weird guy," she said. "You know, someone who's trying to mess with you." "Maybe," Emily replied, though she didn't believe it. That evening, Kate offered to walk her home. The two laughed and chatted as they strolled down the quiet streets. For the first time in days, Emily felt at ease. But as they neared her apartment, her heart sank. He was there again. The man stood in the same spot as before, under the same flickering lamppost. Kate squinted, peering at him. "Is that him?" she asked. Emily nodded, unable to speak. Kate, bolder than Emily had expected, called out, "Hey, what's your deal?" The man didn't move. He just stood there, his head slightly tilted, watching them. Kate grabbed Emily's arm. "Let's go," she said, her voice low and urgent. They hurried into the apartment building, slamming the door shut behind them. Through the peephole, Emily could see the man still standing there, his silhouette unnaturally still. The next day, Emily decided to stay home. She called in sick, hoping that whatever this was, it would go away if she just avoided him. But as night fell, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She closed the curtains and turned on every light in her apartment, but the sense of unease only grew. At around midnight, there was a knock at her door. Emily froze. No one ever visited her this late, and Kate had her own key. The knock came again, louder this time. She crept toward the door, her hands trembling, and peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Her breath hitched. She backed away from the door, her heart pounding in her chest. The knocking stopped, replaced by a chilling silence. Then she noticed something, shadows pooling at the base of the door. They writhed and twisted, snaking across the floor like living things. Emily stumbled back, her mind racing. The shadows seemed to pulse, stretching toward her, though there was no source of light to cast them. And then she saw him. The man with no shadow stood in the corner of her living room, his dark suit blending into the dimness. He tilted his head, the same motion she had seen before, but this time his face was clearer. It was pale and expressionless, his eyes dark voids that seemed to swallow the light. Emily screamed and ran for the door, but the shadows surged toward her, tripping her up and pulling her down. She clawed at the floor, desperate to escape, but the darkness consumed her. The next morning, Kate stopped by Emily's apartment, worried after not hearing from her. The door was unlocked and the apartment was eerily quiet. The lights were all on, but Emily was nowhere to be found. What she did find sent chills down her spine. On the living room wall, in the soft glow of the morning sun, was a shadow. It was unmistakably Emily's, frozen mid-reach, as if she had been clawing for help. Kate backed away, her breath hitching, and stepped outside into the safety of the daylight. But as she left, she couldn't help glancing at the sidewalk. The shadow that should have followed her footsteps was gone. The echoes of the Wendigo. The forest at Frost Ridge was a vast expanse of untamed wilderness, stretching for miles without interruption. Hikers loved it for its solitude, its untouched beauty. But it was the kind of place that could quickly turn hostile, where nature wasn't just serene, it was overwhelming. For Charlie and his friends, Sam, Taylor, and Mia, it was supposed to be a weekend escape from the monotony of their 9-to-5 lives. They packed their gear, pitched a tent deep in the woods, and spent their first night laughing around a roaring fire under a canopy of stars. But their laughter stopped on the second night, just as the fire was dying down and the forest had grown quiet. That's when they heard it. A voice, faint but unmistakable, calling for help. "Help me. Please." Charlie was the first to stand. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice tight. Sam nodded. "Yeah, it sounded like someone's out there." The group exchanged uneasy glances. It was late, far too late for anyone else to be out here. But the voice came again, clearer this time. "Help! I'm lost." Taylor grabbed a flashlight. "We can't just ignore it," she said. "What if someone's hurt?" Mia hesitated. "But how would they even get this far out without gear? It doesn't make sense." "Exactly," Charlie said, his unease growing. "And why are they just calling for help? Why aren't they coming toward us?" Taylor gave him a look. "Are you seriously saying we should ignore someone who might need help?" Before Charlie could protest further, Taylor and Sam started walking toward the sound, their flashlights cutting through the dense trees. Charlie and Mia reluctantly followed, their own beams of light casting long, shifting shadows. The voice continued, guiding them deeper into the forest. "Help! Please, over here!" But the closer they got, the stranger it sounded. The desperation in the voice didn't waver, didn't change. It was as if someone were playing the same recording over and over again. And then there was the way it moved, first ahead of them, then to the left, then suddenly to the right, like it was circling them. Mia stopped in her tracks. "Guys, this isn't right," she whispered. "Something's off." They froze as the voice shifted again, this time directly behind them. "Help me!" Charlie spun around, his flashlight beam shaking. "Hello," he called out, his voice cracking. "Who's there?" Silence, not even the usual forest sounds of rustling leaves or distant animal calls. Just an oppressive, suffocating quiet. That's when Taylor gasped, her flashlight catching something in the trees. A figure, just barely visible, crouched low to the ground. It was human-like, but its limbs were too long, its posture too unnatural. Its eyes glinted in the beam of the flashlight, and its head tilted slightly, almost as if it were studying them. "Run," Charlie said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Run now." They turned and bolted, their flashlights bouncing wildly as they navigated the dense undergrowth. The voice followed them, closer now, but it had changed. It wasn't just calling for help. It was repeating their own words, distorted and mocking. "Run now! Run now!" Mia screamed as she tripped over a root, tumbling to the ground. Charlie stopped to help her, his heart pounding as the voice grew louder. "Run now! Run now!" Behind them, the figure emerged from the shadows, its movements jerky but horrifyingly fast. In the faint moonlight, Charlie could see it more clearly. A gaunt, emaciated creature with hollow eyes and a face twisted into a grotesque grin. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over its bones. "Get up!" Charlie shouted, yanking Mia to her feet. They ran together, the others just ahead of them, until the forest finally opened into a clearing. Panting and trembling, they turned back to see if the creature had followed. But the edge of the forest was empty, the darkness impenetrable. The voice had stopped. For a moment all they could hear was their ragged breathing. Then Taylor spoke, her voice shaking. "What? What was that?" No one had an answer. They made it back to their campsite, but none of them slept that night. They sat huddled around the fire, jumping at every rustle of the wind, every crack of a branch. As dawn broke, they packed up their gear in silence and started the long trek back to their car. But as they reached the trailhead, something caught Charlie's eye. There, in the dirt, were footprints. At first, they looked human, but they were too large, the toes elongated and claw-like. The tracks led back into the forest, toward the direction of their campsite. It wasn't until much later that Charlie learned the stories about Frost Ridge. The locals spoke of a creature that mimicked human voices, luring unsuspecting victims into the woods. They called it a Wendigo, a malevolent spirit of hunger and deception. Charlie doesn't go hiking anymore. The others moved on, trying to forget what they'd seen. But late at night, when he's lying awake, Charlie sometimes hears it again, the voice, faint and distorted, calling to him from the shadows of his mind. Help me, please. And he knows that somewhere in the depths of the forest, the Wendigo is still waiting. In the vast, untamed wilderness, the echoes of the Wendigo remain, a sinister reminder that some voices are meant to lead you astray. The next time you hear a cry for help in the darkness, ask yourself, is it someone in need or something that feeds? Remember, not every sound in the forest wants you to come closer.